pinnacle of human perspective.
Welcome to Unbiased and On the Fence. I'm Shane. Thank you so much for joining. Well, one of my favorite topics that I haven't really covered a lot of is aliens and abductions and UFOs. I've never seen any UFOs that I can say for sure was a UFO. I always wanted to, but very interesting topic. In fact, I'm reading a book right now entitled Forgotten Promise, I believe is the title of it. But it's about this lady who had to live for years with, having to come to terms with the fact that she'd been abducted, and she didn't think she'd been abducted, but after a rash of UFO sightings in her area, she went through some hypnosis and found out that she had been being abducted for years, and people like that have to go through quite a bit. I mean, if you think about all the jokes and stuff like on late night TV and just, I don't know, it's just sort of a thing that people joke about. Maybe you got abducted by aliens like it's something to laugh about, but indeed it is far from a joke for people who's actually experienced it. And so yeah, it was a kind of a wake up call to me to start reading this book and hear about it. But I actually wanted to start with that because I wanted to sort of kind of cover up the fact that I'm not going to even put the source in this video title, because I feel like the information in here, even though it's over 30 years old, is something that would be suppressed, and makes me wonder about the law of one material being, I hadn't really seen it. I don't know that it was suppressed in a really big way, but I was surprised that so few people have come across it, and that the channelings ended abruptly with one of the three that were doing the channelings, the questioner, who was normally really optimistic, sort of started having mental issues and everything. He was even warned by Ra in the last session about it, and that was their last session, 106. So with the Ra material, I got some really interesting information as it relates to the Ra material and just UFOs in general, as far as even technology. So keep this in mind as I'm reading through this, that this is from 1981, and I hope it doesn't freak anybody out too much, but just keep in mind it's over 3 decades old, and if they had this kind of technology in 81, what have they achieved at this point, or what could they have achieved? So this is actually under the category of UFOs. The photographs of the bell-shaped craft and reports of contact from Venus exist from less than 30 years ago. Do you have any knowledge of these reports? I am Ra. We have knowledge of oneness with these forays of your time-space present. We are no longer of Venus. However, there are thought forms created among your peoples from our time of walking among you. The memory of thought forms created therefrom are part of your social memory complex. The mass consciousness, as you may call it, creates the experience once more for those who request such experience. The present Venus population is no longer sixth density. Now, I found this really interesting, because some thought forms from back when, the time of Egypt is still in our mass consciousness and creates these experiences. So I really don't have any more to read into that. It's just sort of strange. It's especially when you consider the Mandela effect, and it's seeming like there's something going on with consciousness and things like that. Of Questioner, do any of the UFOs that are presently reported come from other planets here at this time, or do you have this knowledge? I am Ra. I am one of the members of the Confederation of Planets in the service of the Infinite Creator. There are approximately 53 civilizations comprising approximately 500 planetary consciousness complexes in this confederation. This confederation contains those from your own planet who have attained dimensions beyond your third. It contains planetary entities within your solar system, and it contains planetary entities from other galaxies. It is a true confederation in that its members are not alike, but allied in service according to the law of one. Do any of them come here at this time in spacecraft in the past, say, 30 years? I am Ra. We must state that this information is unimportant. If you will understand this, we feel that the information may be acceptably offered. The law of one is what we are here to express. However, we will speak upon this subject. Each planetary entity which wishes to appear within your third dimensional space-time distortion requests permission to break quarantine, as you might call it, and appear to your peoples. The reason and purpose for this appearance is understood and either accepted or rejected. There have been as many as 15 of the Confederation entities in your skies at any one time, the others available to you through thought. At present there are 7 which are operating with craft in your density. Their purposes are very simple: to allow those entities of your planet to become aware of infinity, which is often best expressed to the uninformed as the mysterious or unknown. Questioner, I am interested in the application of the law of one as it pertains to free will and what I would call the advertising done by UFO contact with the planet. This is, the Council has allowed the quarantine, that is, the Council has allowed the quarantine to be lifted many times over the past 30 years. This seems to me to be a form of advertising for what we are doing right now, so that more people will be awakened. Am I correct? I am Ra. It will take a certain amount of untangling, of conceptualization of your mental complex to reform your query into an appropriate response. Please bear with us. The Council of Saturn has not allowed the breaking of quarantine in the time-space continuum you mentioned. There is a certain amount of landing taking place. Some of these landings are of your peoples, some of the entities known to you as the group of Orion. Secondly, there is permission granted not to break quarantine by dwelling among you, but to appear in thought form capacity for those who have eyes to see. Thirdly, you are correct in assuming that permission was granted at the time-space in which your first nuclear device was developed and used for Confederation members to minister unto your peoples in such a way as to cause mystery to occur. This is what you mean by advertising and is correct. The mystery and unknown quality of the occurrences we are allowed to offer have the hoped for intention of making your peoples aware of infinite possibility. When your peoples grasp infinity, then and only then can the gateway be opened to the law of one. You mentioned both our people and those of Orion coming here. Can you expand on that? He didn't understand. I'll just ask about Orion. You mentioned Orion as a source of some of the contacts of UFOs. Can you tell me something of that contact? I am Ra. Now, this was actually covered in the Adolf one, so if it sounds familiar, some of the subjects get overlapped. Consider, if you will, a simple example of intentions which are bad good. This example is Adolf. This is your vibratory sound complex. The intention is to presumably unify by choosing the distortion complex called elite from a social memory complex and then enslaving by various effects those who are seen as the distortion not elite. There is then the concept of taking the social memory complex thus weeded and adding it to a distortion thought of by the so-called Orion group as an empire. The problem facing them is that they face a great deal of random energy released by the concept of separation. This causes them to be vulnerable as the distortions amongst their own members are not harmonized. There was a portion of the material yesterday, which I will read, where you say, there is a certain amount of landing taking place. Some of these landings are of your peoples. Some are the entities known to you as the group of Orion. My first question is, what did you mean by the landings are of your peoples? I am Ra. Your peoples have, at this time-space present, the technological achievement, if you would call it that, of being able to create and fly the shape and type of craft known to you as unidentified flying objects. Unfortunately, for the social memory complex vibratory rate of your peoples, these devices are not intended for the surface of mankind, but for potential destructive use. This further muddles the vibratory nexus of your social memory complex, causing a situation whereby neither those oriented towards serving others nor those oriented towards serving self can gain the energy power which opens the gates to intelligent infinity for the social memory complex. This in turn causes the harvest to be small. Are these craft that are of our peoples from what we call planes that are not incarnate at this time? Where are they based? I am Ra. These of which we spoke are of third density and are part of the so-called military complex of various of your people's societal divisions or structures. The bases are varied. These are bases, as you would call them, under sea in your southern waters near the Bahamas, as well as in your Pacific seas in various places close to your Chilean borders on the water. There are bases upon your moon, as you call the satellite, which are at this time being reworked. There are bases which move about your lands. There are bases, if you would call them that, in your skies. These are the bases of your peoples, very numerous and, as we have said, potentially destructive. Where do the people who operate these craft come from? Are they affiliated with any nation on earth? What is their source? Ra. These people come from the same place as you or I. They come from the Creator. As you intend the question in its shallower aspect, these people are those in your and other selves governments responsible for what you would term national security. Questioner. Am I to understand then that the United States has these craft and undersea bases? I am Ra. You are correct. Questioner. How did the United States learn of the technology to build these? It was inaudible. I am Ra. There was a mind-body-spirit complex known to your peoples by the vibratory sound complex, Nikolai, or Nicola. This entity departed the illusion, and the papers containing the necessary understandings were taken by mind-body-spirit complexes serving your security of national division complex. Thus your people became privy to the basic technology. In the case of those mind-body-spirit complexes, which you call Russians, the technology was given from one of the confederation in an attempt approximately 27 of your years ago to share information and bring about peace among your peoples. The entities giving this information were in error, but we did many things at the end of this cycle in attempts to aid your harvest, from which we learned the folly of certain types of aid. That is a contributing factor to our more cautious approach at this date, even as the need is power upon power greater, and your people's call is greater and greater. Questioner: I'm puzzled by these craft that we have undersea bases for. They are inaudible. Is this technology sufficient to overshadow all other armaments? Do we have just the ability to fly in these craft, or are there any weapons like there are? Were they given to us inaudible, or are they just craft for transport? What is the basic mechanism of their inaudible? It's just really hard to believe, is what I'm saying. I am Ra. The craft are perhaps misnamed in some instances. It would be more appropriate to consider them as weaponry. The energy used is that of the field of electromagnetic energy which polarizes the Earth sphere. The weaponry is of two basic kinds, that which is called by your peoples psychotronic, and that which is called by your peoples particle beam. The amount of destruction which is contained in this technology is considerable, and the weapons have been used in many cases to alter weather patterns and to enhance the vibratory change which engulfs your planet at this time. How have they been able to keep this a secret? Why aren't these craft in use for transport? Ra: the governments of each of your societal division illusions desire to refrain from publicity so that the surprise may be retained in case of hostile action from what your peoples call enemies. Questioner: how many of these craft does the United States have? I am Ra. The United States has 573 at this time. They are in the process of adding to this number. Questioner: what is the maximum speed of one of these craft? I am Ra. The maximum speed of these craft is equal to the Earth energy squared. This field varies. The limit is approximately 1/2 the light speed, as you would call it. This is due to imperfections in design. Wow. Questioner: wouldn't this type of craft totally solve or come close to solving a lot of the energy problems as far as transport goes that we're used to transporting? Inaudible. I am Ra. The technology your peoples possess at this time is capable of resolving each and every limitation which plagues your social memory complex at this present nexus of experience. This is 81, keep in mind. However, the concerns of some of your beings with distortion towards what you would call powerful energy cause these solutions to be withheld until the solutions are so needed that those with the distortion can then become further distorted in the direction of power. Questioner: at the time you mentioned that some of the landings were of our peoples. You also mentioned that some were of the Orion group. We talked a little about the Orion group, but why did the Orion group land here? What is their purpose? I am Ra. Their purpose is conquest. Unlike those of the Confederation who wait for the calling, the so-called Orion group calls itself to conquest. Questioner: specifically, what do they do when they land? Ra: there are two types of landings. In the first, entities among your peoples are taken on their craft and programmed for future use. There are 2 or 3 levels of programming. First, the level that will be discovered by those who do research. Second, a triggering program. Third, a second and most deep triggering program, crystallizing the entity, thereby rendering it lifeless and useful as a kind of beacon. This is a form of landing. The second form is that of landing beneath the Earth's crust, which is entered from water. Again, in the general area of your South American and Caribbean areas and close to the so-called Northern Pole, the bases of these people are underground. Questioner. Was a landing at Pascagoula in 1973 when Charlie Hickson was taken on board this type of landing? Now, I wanted to take a quick detour to just mention what they're talking about here, because I'm actually, I can't say this much about stuff, but I'm too young to have even heard about this. So this happened before I was born, but this Charlie Hickson guy got abducted. They had all sorts of experts come and check out his story, and it was, you know, it was probably one of the best documented and verified stories of the time. He just said they took him on board and then seemed to like scan him, and they hovered his body onto this craft, and there's not really a lot to the story other than all of the science that went into checking out his story with hypnotists and specialists and everything checking it all out. So okay, so he was asking about that and if it was one of the Ra contacts, or I'm sorry, the Orion group contacts. I am Ra. The landing of which you speak was what you would call an anomaly. It was neither the Orion influence nor our people's in thought form, but rather a planetary entity of your own vibration, which came through quarantine in all innocence in a random landing. Now this is pretty cool. What did they do to Charlie Hickson when they took him on board? I am Ra. They used his mind-body-spirit complex as life experiences, concentrating upon the experience of the complexes of what you call war. Questioner. How did they use them? I am Ra. The use of experience is to learn. Consider a race who watches a movie. It experiences a story and identifies with the feelings, perceptions, and experiences of the hero. Questioner. Was Charlie Hickson originally of the same social memory complex as the ones who picked him up? I am Ra. This entity of vibratory sound complex did not have a connection with those who used him. Questioner. Did those who used him use his war experience to learn more of the law of one? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner. Were the entities that picked him, can you describe, is that the normal configuration of these entities? They looked rather unusual. That's probably what it said. I am Ra. The configuration of their beings is their normal configuration. The unusualness is not remarkable. We ourselves, when we chose a mission among your peoples, needed to study your peoples, for had we arrived in no other form than our own, we would have been perceived as light. Questioner. Well, what density did the entities who picked up Charlie Hickson come from? What was their density? I am Ra. The entities in whom you show such interest are third density beings of a fairly high order. We should express the understanding to you that these entities would not have used the mind-body-spirit complex, Charlie, except for the resolve of this entity before incarnation to be of service. Questioner. What was the home or origin of these entities that took Charlie? I am Ra. These entities are of the Sirius galaxy. That's pretty cool. Questioner. The most startling information that you've given me, which I must admit I'm having difficulty believing, is that the United States has 573 craft like you described. How many people in our government are aware that we have these? How many total people of United States designation are aware of this, including those who operate the craft? I am Ra. The number of your peoples varies, for there are needs to communicate at this particular time-space nexus, so the number is expanding at this time. The approximate number is 1,500. It is only approximate, for as your illusory time-space continuum moves from present to present. At this nexus, many are learning. Questioner, where are these craft constructed? Ra, these craft are constructed one by one in two locations, in the desert or arid regions of your so-called New Mexico and in the desert or arid regions of your so-called Mexico, both installations being under the ground. Questioner, do you say the United States actually has a manufacturing plant in Mexico? I am Ra. I spoke thusly. May I, at this time, reiterate that this type of information is very shallow and of no particular consequence compared to the study of the law of one. However, we carefully watch these developments in hopes that your peoples are able to be harvested in peace. Questioner, I am totally aware how this line of questioning is of no consequence at all, but this particular information is so startling to me that it makes me question your validity on this. Up until this point, I was in agreement with everything. This is very startling, and it does not seem possible that the secret could have been kept 27 years and that we are operating these craft. I apologize for my attitude, but I thought I would be very honest about this. It is unbelievable to me that we would operate a plant in Mexico, outside of the United States, to build these craft. Maybe I'm mistaken. These craft are physical craft built by our physical people. I could go get in one and ride in one. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is incorrect. You could not ride one. The United States, as you call your societal divisional complex, creates these as a type of weapon. Questioner, there are no occupants then? No pilot, shall I say? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner, how are they controlled? Ra, I am Ra. They are controlled by computer from a remote source of data. So they were already flying UFO drones back in '81. That's crazy. Questioner, why do we have a plant in Mexico? I am Ra. The necessity is both for dryness of the ground and for a near total lack of population. Therefore, your so-called government and the so-called government of your neighboring geographical vicinity arranged for an underground installation. The government officials who agreed did not know the use to which their land would be put, but thought it a governmental research installation for use in what you would call bacteriological warfare. Questioner, is this the type of craft that Dan Fry was transported in? I am Ra. The one known as Daniel was in thought form transported by Confederation thought form vehicular illusion in order to give this mind-body-spirit complex data so that we might see how this type of contact aided your people in the uncovering of the intelligent infinity behind the illusions, or the illusion of limits. That's pretty strange. So he rode in a thought form craft just to give him the illusion for his brain to understand what's going on. That's pretty strange. Questioner, the reason that I have questioned you so much upon the craft which you say the United States government operates is that if we include this in the book, it will create numerous problems. It is something that I am considering leaving out of the book entirely, or I am going to have to question you in considerable detail about it. It's difficult to even question in this area, but I would like maybe to ask a few more questions about it, with still the possible option of leaving it out of the book. What are the diameter of these craft, the United States? I am Ra. I suggest that this be the last question. We speak as you deem fit in further sessions. The approximate diameter given several model changes is 23 of your feet as you measure. Okay. Does this account for what we call the UFO flaps, where a large number of UFOs show up like in 1973? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner. Well then, are most of the UFOs which are seen in our skies from the Orion group? I am Ra. Many of those seen in your skies are of the Orion group. They send out messages. Some are received by those who are oriented towards service to others. These messages then are altered to be acceptable to those entities while warning of difficulties ahead. This is the most that self-serving entities can do when faced with those who wish to serve others. The contacts which the group finds most helpful to their cause are those contacts made with entities whose orientation is towards service to self. There are many thought form entities in your sky which are of a positive nature and are the projections of the confederation. Other sightings are due to the inadvertent visualization of your people's optical mechanisms of your own government's weaponry. Questioner. Which group was in that contact Henry Puerich in Israel right around 1972? I am Ra. We must refrain from answering this query due to the probability that the one you call Henry will read this answer. Questioner. Does that also apply to answering who was contacting the group that I originally was in 1962? I am Ra. This query may be answered. The group contacted was the Confederation. Questioner. Did they have any of their craft in our area at that time? I am Ra. There was no craft. There was a thought form. Questioner. The only other question that went with this, that is, was there a crashed spaceship and are there small bodies now stored in our military installations? I am Ra. We do not wish to infringe upon your future. Gave we you this information, we might be giving you more than you could appropriately deal with in the space-time nexus of your present, somewhat muddled configuration of military and intelligence thought. Therefore, we shall withhold this information. Questioner. Then as the UFO phenomena was made obvious to many of the population, many groups of people reported contact. Many groups of people reported telepathic communication with UFO entities, and many recorded the results of what they considered telepathic communication. Was the Confederation, shall we say, oriented to impressing telepathic communication on groups that became interested in UFOs? I am Ra. This is correct, although some of our members have removed themselves from the time-space using thought form projections into your space-time, and have chosen from time to time, with permission of the Council, to appear in your skies without landing. Questioner. Then are all of the landings that have occurred except for the landing when Eisenhower was contacted, are all of those landings of the Orion group or similar type groups? I am Ra, except for isolated instances of those of, shall we say, no affiliation. This is correct. Could you make this instrument cough, please? Cough. That's funny. Questioner. Could you give me an example of a planet of this nature, both a third density service to others type and a third density self-service type at this level of attainment conditions? I am Ra. As far as we are aware, there are no negatively oriented third density social memory complexes. Positively oriented social memory complexes of third density are not unheard of, but quite rare. However, an entity from the star Sirius planetary body has approached this planetary body twice. This entity is late third density and is part of a third density social memory complex. This has been referred to in the previous material. The social memory complex is properly a fourth density phenomenon. Questioner. I was wondering if that particular social memory complex from the Sirius star evolved from trees. This is strange. I am Ra. This approaches correctness. correctness. Those second density vegetation forms which graduated into third density upon this planet bearing the name of dog were close to the tree as you know it. Like a dog race or something. That's weird. Okay, questioner. I believe this is an important point for us in understanding. An important point for us in understanding the balancing aspect of meditation, since we have here its antithesis in another type of evolution. These entities moved, we are told, by Charlie Hickson without moving their legs. I am assuming, they use a principle that is somewhat similar to the principle of movement of your crystal bells in moving their physical vehicles. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is partially incorrect. Questioner. But I am just assuming that their method of movement is not a function of mechanical leverage such as ours, but as direct function of the mind somehow connected with the magnetic action of a planet. Is this right? I am Ra. This is largely correct. It is an electromagnetic phenomenon which is controlled by thought impulses of a weak electrical nature. Questioner. Was their craft visible to Would it have been visible to anyone of our density on our planet who might have seen it or might have been in that area at that time? Is it a third density material the same as this chair or anything we have here? I am Ra. This is correct. Please ask one more question. It's a different session here. Thank you. The next question I feel to be a transient type of question. However, it has been asked me by one whom I have communicated with, who has been intensively involved in the UFO portion of the phenomenon. If you deem it too transient or unimportant, we'll skip it. But I have been asked how it is possible for the craft of, shall we say, the fourth density to get here, in that it seems that as you approach the velocity of light, mass approaches infinite. We have talked about the increase of spiritual mass, and it was just a question as to how this transition from very distant planets is made in a craft, and my question would be why craft would be necessary at all. This is not an important question. Firstly, Ra answers, we agree that this material is transient. Secondly, those for the most part coming from distant points, as you term them, do not need craft as you know them. The query itself requires understanding which you do not possess. We shall attempt to state what may be stated. Firstly, there are a few third density entities who have learned how to use craft to travel between star systems while experiencing the limitations you now understand. However, such entities have learned to use hydrogen in a way different from your understanding now. These entities still take quite long durations of time, as you measure it, to move about. However, these entities are able to use hypothermia to slow the physical and mental complex processes in order to withstand a duration of flight. Those such as are from Sirius are of this type. There are two other types. So they use cryogenics, I guess. That's cool. One is the type which, coming from fourth, fifth, or sixth density in your own galaxy, has access to a type of energy which uses the speed of light as a slingshot and thus arrives where it wishes without any perceptible time elapsed in your view. The other type of experience is that of fourth, fifth, and sixth densities of other galaxies and some within your own galaxy which have learned the necessary disciplines of personality to view the universe as one being and therefore are able to proceed from locus to locus by thought alone, materializing the necessary craft, if you will, to enclose the light body of the entity. Questioner: I assume that latter type is the type that we experience with most of our landings from the Orion group. Is this correct? I am Ra. The Orion group is mixed between the penultimate and the latter groups. Questioner: why is a vehicle necessary for this transition? When you, as Ra, went to Egypt earlier, you used bell-shaped craft, but you did this by thought. Can you tell me why you used a vehicle rather than just materializing the body? I am Ra. The vehicle or craft is that thought form upon which our concentration may function as motivator. We would not choose to use our mind-body-spirit complexes as the focus of such a working. Questioner: thank you. Just as something that I am a little inquisitive about, not much important, but I'd like to make a statement I intuitively see, which may be wrong. You were speaking of the slingshot effect, and that term has puzzled me. The only thing I can see is that you must put energy into the craft until it approaches the velocity of light, and this, of course, requires more and more and more energy. The time dilation occurs, and it seems to me that it would be possible to, moving at 90 degrees to the direction of travel, somehow change the stored energy in its application of direction or sense so that you move out of space-time into time-space with a 90-degree deflection. Then the energy would be taken out in time, space, and you would re-enter space-time at the end of this energy reversal. Am I in any way correct on this? I am Ra. You are quite correct as far as your language may take you, and due to your training, more able than we to express the concept. Our only correction, if you will, would be to suggest that the 90 degrees of which you speak are an angle which may best be understood as a portion of a tesseract, which is a fourth dimensional shape. Questioner: then both Confederation and Orion contacts are being made, and close encounters are of a dual nature as I understand it. They can either be of the Confederation or Orion type of contact. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct, although the preponderance of contacts is Orion oriented. Questioner: then in general I could say that if an individual has a close encounter with a UFO or any other type of experience that seems to be UFO related, he must look to the heart of the encounter and the effect upon him to determine whether it was Orion or Confederation contact. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. If there is fear and doom, the contact was quite likely of a negative nature. If the result is hope, friendly feelings, and the awakening of a positive feeling of purposeful service to others, the marks of Confederation contact are evident. Questioner: I'll ask this question to inform me a little bit about what you just stated. When you came to this planet in craft 18,000 and 11,000 years ago, these craft have been called, I believe, Bell craft, and were photographed by George Adamski. If I am correct, these craft look somewhat like a bell. They had portals around the upper portions, and they had 3 hemispheres at 120 degrees apart underneath. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. Questioner: were these constructed in time-space or space-time? I am Ra. We ask your persistent patience, for our answer must be complex. A construct of thought was formed in time-space. This portion of time-space is that which approaches the speed of light. In time-space, at this approach, the conditions are such that time becomes infinite and mass ceases, so that one which is able to skim the, shall we say, boundary strength of this time-space is able to become placed where it will. when we were where we wished to be, when then clothed the construct of light with that which would appear as the crystal bell. This was formed through the boundary into space-time. Thus, there were two constructs, the time-space or immaterial construct and the space-time or materialized construct. Questioner: now, was there a reason for the particular shape you chose? In particular, a reason for 3 hemispheres on the bottom? I am Ra. It seemed an aesthetically pleasing form and one well suited to those limited uses which we must needs make of your space-time motivating requirements. Questioner: was there a principle of motivation contained within the 3 hemispheres on the bottom, or were they just aesthetic, or were they landing gear? I am Ra. These were aesthetic and part of a system of propulsion. These hemispheres were not landing gear. Questioner: I'm interested. I can't help but be interested in the fact that he had reported being taken on board craft. Could you tell me something about that? I am Ra. The nature of contact is such that in order for the deep portion of the trunk of the tree of mind affected to be able to accept the contact, some symbology which may rise to the conscious mind is necessary as a framework for the explanation of the fruits of the contact. In such cases, the entity's own expectations fashion the tell which shall be most acceptable to that entity, and in the dream state, or a trance state in which visions may be produced, this seeming memory is fed into the higher levels of the so-called subconscious and the lower levels of the conscious. From this point, the story may surface as any memory and cause the instrument to function without losing balance or sanity. Oh, definitely interesting stuff there. So it's like whatever you're expecting to see when you get on one of these thought form craft is what you see. That's pretty odd. So I appreciate you all sticking with me. This was something I wanted to share early on, but I figured I better wait in case I get offed or something. But no, it's been out there for a while. I'm just joking. But you never know what's going on, and definitely hitting a lot more people than I would have a long time ago. So with that, I will end this broadcast, and it's a lot to think about there. But you can go to thelawofone.info and check this out for yourself if you want, because it's a lot to take in. So I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.
Mm-hmm.